Hello, my name is Patricia Holmes, and we are beginning Chapter 6. So let's look at the final outcome, which is our goal of building. I'm going to open up the Chapter 6 end file. I'm going to hit the play button, and let's take a look at what we're doing here. Here we have an animation of planets, a satellite, a zoom in, text, and then the satellite is going to connect with Jupiter. And the satellite is called Juno. So Juno arrives at Jupiter 5 years after it launches off. So what I want to do is I want to tell you a little bit about our learning outcomes for this particular chapter first before we start getting into building it. Some of the learning outcomes, the main learning outcome here is using the camera tool. And the camera tool icon is right on our tool line. It's right up here. And you'll click it. So if you unclick it, you'll see that layer is gone, and we're going to click it, and we're going to always be working with this. The other thing I want to teach you about this particular chapter is that guide layers, you'll see these guide layer icon. We worked on it in the last chapter. The guide layers are an option that come from creating a classic tween versus the motion tween. They both do a similar job, but the classic tween allows you to customize your guide layers. Guide layers cannot be seen when you play a movie. They're invisible. But why are we seeing what appears to be guide layers in this movie? Because they were duplicated and drawn upon in this file called orbits. So if I blind out this file called orbits, you'll see the lines go away. Anyway, that's kind of a cool technique I wanted to point out. And the rest of the things that we're going to be doing in this chapter outside of the camera is previous knowledge. So I want you to first to open up the Chapter 6 start file and immediately save it as working. That way we preserve our start file. Now, before we begin, I want to tell you guys about the camera. The camera has a couple of rules and limitations to it. I want to move my timeline out of the way here, and I want to show you the slider. We're going to be working with the slider. And this perspective right here, this black box with the blue color around it, is based on how we are viewing our stage. So keep that in mind. If you want to make the box bigger, you got to come up here and make the stage a little bit bigger. That's what the camera is viewing. All right, so that's one thing. The other thing that's really important to understand about the camera are some rules to using this particular tool. And I'd like to tell you about the rules real quickly before we get going. So you can only have one camera layer, and it always has to be at the top. By default, it's going to go to the top. You cannot rename the camera layer, so keep that in mind. If you try to do that, it's not going to happen. You can't really add objects like images or anything on the camera layer, but you can add some classic motion tweens to the layer, which will allow you to animate some of the filters. We're actually going to do that later in this chapter. And then when the camera tool is selected, you cannot move or edit objects in other layers. You'll have to get out of the camera. So you can get out of the camera by unselecting it, or you can go to another layer and click the selection tool, and that will help you. So the camera layer has a little bit of different properties. And then finally, more importantly, not more importantly, but just as importantly, we need to understand the slider. We can manually use the slider when we build this, but I want you to come over here and look at the property window and watch what happens to the properties when I move the slider. The properties change. So in other words, we can go into the property and type in, what we want if we don't want to use the slider. So just like most things in Adobe Animate, there's 2 or 3 ways to get the same thing done. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, my goal again is to keep these videos really short. That's an introduction to what we're getting ready to do. Let's pick up on the next video and begin building this relatively short chapter of Chapter 6. Okay, thanks for listening.